Was it?
Oh,
Yes.
it's
Did you record it and share it?
No, I wish we would have. I've tried to make it to 4 of these, and every single one of them fell through, so I was so thankful.
I look a lot younger here, frankly.
Well, so did we.
Did you really?
That was probably 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
That looks 10 years ago.
Yeah.
On me, not you guys. You haven't changed at all.
Oh no, we have.
Look at that. I'm wearing the Irish shirt. Someone's wearing you're wearing a Western Washington shirt?
Yeah.
Did you go there?
Yeah.
We both did, yeah.
I did too.
Did you really?
Well, I was an artist in residence
Oh, I didn't know
at
that.
Fairhaven in
Oh, wow.
1970. Well, they didn't know what they were doing, really, but they gave it to me. Largely because I had organized an arts festival, and they were impressed with that. So they said, let's have that guy up here. Also because I was editor of an underground paper. That's probably more important.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your names?
I'm Jamie. My husband, Jim.
Jim, nice to meet you.
And you guys live now where?
We lived in Magnolia at the time that we met you, but we are in Sammamish now. We're on the east side.
Oh, yeah.
We've done a few of your walking tours, and we did the one over by, what's the one by UW?
Well, we did the one of the homes
Montlake,
here,
we
the
did
Montlake
too.
one, and then this was the walking
Wait a
tour.
second. Not my walking tours. You're mistaking me for somebody else.
No, no.
My name is Paul Dorpat.
Yes, sir. We know exactly
You know
who you
that?
are.
But I haven't
Yes.
given any walking tours, have I?
Yeah,
Not for,
You're used to 10
not
years.
since I stopped walking.
Well,
This
10
was,
years
yeah,
ago.
this was like 10 years
No
ago.
kidding, I didn't want like walking tours, did I?
You did of homes. It was right around the
Wow.
Museum of History and Industry. But this one was on the waterfront.
Yes, I can see. That's that's the old
And
Fed building.
you not only shared great things about Seattle, but a lot of humor too, which was great. Oh, and we got a cup of chowder.
Oh, now I remember. That's right, because that was the draw. I said, listen, we can't expect many people to show up for this, but if you give free chowder, it'll probably be well attended.
It was well attended.
Yeah,
We came to see you, though, not the chowder.
Yeah. Yes.
you're so sweet. So I tell you, those were fun, weren't they?
Yes, they
Oh,
were
they're
very
great.
fun.
Yeah. Free chowder.
Yep.
Isn't that lovely?
It is lovely. Are you going to sign?
Those
Did you want to
guys
Yeah, no, if you
Yeah,
can sign
yeah.
it,
So
that'd be
Jamie and
awesome.
Those
Jim.
guys have a
They look fantastic, and so do you. Are you going to autograph it for Jamie and Jim?
Yeah.
Jamie.
So
Give me your
it was a
hand.
treat. Yeah. It was a treat.
Thank you very much.
Of course. I just loved it.
Oh, I know, me
All right,
too.
this is Jamie right
That's
here.
Jamie,
You
yeah.
know that?
That's- I do, I do.
Margaret?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do.
Yeah.
So to Jamie. You sure you want me to write on this?
Of
Oh,
course.
yeah.
Okay.
I'd have you sign my body, but it'd wash off.
I'd do it. To Jamie. Jamie.
M-I-E.
Oh, boy. What's the date today? You want to put the date in there?
Today is December 22nd.
Keys.
Yes.
Absolutely. We could have him sign your book now too.
Yeah. I'll send this audience now.
I was once her landlord.
Yep. My landlord.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's have him
She
here.
and her daughter Pliny, who's now
24.
24 years old.
Yeah.
I knew Pliny when she was 4 months. I
Yeah.
Wow.
remember playing the piano with her.
Yeah. You taught her how to read.
Yeah, that's
You were
right.
the first person with her.
Yeah. And then your brother took over with me.
Shall we start?
Yes.
Shall we begin?
Yes.
Well, okay, I'll do it. I'll take it.
Oh, don't you have to go?
No, I'm here for this.
She's here. So, welcome to our last of 23 book events. And we've been doing this. We started on October 28th, which was Paul's 80th birthday, and have been subject to the whims of our stable genius, who put us about 5 or 6
Clay.
weeks behind. Not Clay, no.
Oh, you mean,
No, I'm not going to name names. It's too hard on me to say the name. but he,
It's a national figure.
a national figure that got us into a trade war with China and delayed our books by ended up being about 5 weeks. So we were supposed to have books in the third week of October, and we now have books only in the month of December, essentially.
So that means you have quite lots of them.
So we're going to do a couple different short versions of our show, which typically would last an hour and 15 minutes or so. We're going to do two 15-minute versions. Yeah, we're going to do the short one. We're going to start, however, with a little biography of Paul. So, of course, to begin any biography,
Look how excited they are.
a miracle of Photoshop. So the reason we're telling this story about Paul is because for the last 37 years, he's produced this column in the Seattle Times. And it's, at this point, about 1,800 columns. And we don't know of any other city in the country that has that kind of record of constant weekly humiliation, what would you call it, where the city is revealed. We show the undergarments of the city, and we show the...
We're very ruthless.
We're ruthless. Well, I've been working with Paul for the past 12 years as his photographer, so a little less than a third of the life of the column. But we start, therefore, because we have to tell the story of Paul's life and how he got to this place.
I didn't ask for this.
He didn't, but we're going to do it anyway. This is Paul during the war years, and it's back when he's about 5 years old. It's 1942, 43, and you call it?
We call that Saving the World for Democracy. World War II, 1942, yeah, or 43, not sure which. Backyard of the parsonage. My dad was a Lutheran preacher, and that's where we were taking it. That went right down to the Red River between Minnesota and North Dakota. It's a famous river that floods a lot. So this was all very flooded a few years ago. Remember that when Grand Forks, North Dakota got flooded? Right there.
Well, we'll go back a little bit earlier and we'll see Paul
I remember that.
as a baby. Here he is sitting on the laps of his four brothers. There's his eldest brother, Ted. And about 15 years ago, I went back, and this is our first then and now. And I went back and I took all four brothers together. And here they are, 15 years ago. And I think, Paul, you are the last remaining extant Dorpat.
I'm the end, and I think got long to go. Look at these tattered clothes. See that? Poverty. That's why you should buy more than one book, maybe. See that? Look at that.
Yeah, it's
Poverty.
You're a pathetic character, we all agree. And here's Paul with the Reverend Theodore Dorpat and his mom, Cherry.
Good, let's get on to the second part.
Okay, why didn't you go into religion, Paul? Why did you stay away from the Lutheran Church?
I lost the faith. Just like you, Gene. Just like most adults. We lost the faith.
And yet you still believe in Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Well, in the mid to late 60s, Paul started a magazine, the first underground paper in the Northwest called The Helix. And The Helix was something that those of us who were 10 years old, 11 years old, we'd use pages from The Helix to cut them out and put them on our walls and offend our mothers. But in particular, he worked with the artist and later the historian and politician Walt Crowley, who joined Paul at the age of, how old was he, 19?
I think about 19, yeah. He was a teenager and very capable and liked to sign his name big. So there you are. Walt was talented and he knew it.
He had a great signature. Well, he designed a number of the Helix covers and posters, and he designed this. As the Helix became more involved in a variety of other things, Paul also became a concert promoter, and this was the Sky River Festival in
The
1968.
first one, am I messing up again? Sorry.
The very
That's
first Sky River.
Clay Eels, the editor of the book, and the mopper. Thank you, Clay.
So look at some of these names. Even youngsters may recognize a few of these from, I mean, there's some astonishing people here. Wow. Richard Pryor, Tina
I set
Turner.
up the station with Richard Pryor on that, for that event.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I took him out on the stage and adjusted the microphone for him and stuff like that.
Anybody here attend Sky River?
We were there.
Right down at the end there. Yeah.
I recognize you.
Oh, sure. My name.
Yeah. I sort of recognize you. You guys friends? The two of you?
She was my neighbor a few years ago.
Oh.
Silas Cool lived right above her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for coming.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, here we are at Sky River. No, I didn't. Here we are at Sky River, and Paul is standing now with a friend of his, Tom Robbins, who also showed up at the festival.
We try to get a lot of celebrities into these shows, you know. Otherwise, what's the sense?
We also ask, now here's a question. If you were at Sky River, were you in this photograph? Because it rained that entire weekend, except the sun came out for a couple hours, and this is what it looked like with the sun out.
Waiting for the interurban in Fremont.
Good point.
That's
true.
idea.
That's where the idea came from, right? Probably, yeah. That's what.
Well, by the late 70s, early 80s, Paul had already gotten involved in history. I think you spent some time studying your first enterprise was to investigate the history of the Merchant Cafe.
Yeah, that's right, the Merchant Cafe, yeah. A friend of mine, Dick Voltry from college, opened it.
And within another year or two, you'd released this book and sold 40,000 copies of 294 glimpses
Quite
of historic
surprising.
Seattle.
I wrote a book about this history of this place. Did you know that?
I knew that.
Oh.
I remember.
But look at, I wrote a book about this place. Where are the readers?
Yeah,
I really feel like a failure.
Well, you sold all those books. Where are they now?
I don't know. They may have them downstairs in the basement.
That's
I'll
possible.
take one.
Did you know that? You work here.
Yes, I saw the book, actually.
No kidding, you did?
Mhm.
Oh, well,
And everyone's been talking about it, so.
that's sweet. That made up for it.
Yeah.
So we go forward now into, here's Paul with a man who wrote the quintessential history of Seattle, and it's in the 50s, and it's never gone out of print.
Who would that be? Never out of print. History of Seattle, never out of print, was published in the Centennial, 1951, 100 years after the different parties showed up at Elkie Point. So who would that be? Yep, Murray Morgan, very good. That's Murray,
Murray became kind of a mentor and teacher to Paul.
as he did to many people. Yeah, they're having an event for him. I don't remember where, I've got it written down. It's about a month, it's about a week away. Look it up, look his name up and you'll come if you're interested in that, because that's gonna be a good event. A lot of writers will be there reflecting on Murray, and I'd say go to that one. I can't remember where it's gonna be.
We'll look it up. This is Lucy Coe Campbell, who was amongst the many interviewees that Paul did talk to about various events in Seattle history. She was, as a child, a witness to the Seattle fire.
So I saw her about the first year that I was doing research. It's a long time ago, Gene. Anyway, that'll be enough.
A little bit later, Paul and I, this is 2011, Paul and I did a big show together after we released a book on Washington State called Washington Then and Now in 2007. We collected all the photographs from around the state that seemed to suit Mohi at the time, and took over their big room before they moved downtown. And our friend Bérengère Lemond came out and filled the foyer with Paris Now and Then photos, a number of which Paul had taken as a 16-year-old visiting Paris, some of the then photos. So she repeated those and filled the foyer. And here we are standing with Beranger, who incidentally, if you look on the back cover of the book, that's Beranger's photo of Paul up on there. So here we are in Paul's back deck, and I'm going to now flip back to 2005, where there's a little moment of it's amusement and coincidence, and just an odd. It's a throwaway moment, but only lasts a minute. And see if you can tell where the fun begins. Let's just.
You want to try to figure out where the.
Oh, that's very much like me, doesn't it? He does.
Here we are in Paris in 2005.
Take this video. Okay.
So Paul has just handed me the video camera. So Beranger sends it back, and she has to get a picture. And in about 15 seconds, the two of them will look up into the camera, and this is the moment that I love. At this point, I begin to laugh, so the camera shakes a bit.
That was worth the afternoon.
So how often do you actually
Doppelganger, real doppelganger.
It's pretty rare. Turns out the guy was Beranger went back 4 or 5 years later and met this fellow again. And he's a Romanian Orthodox priest. Here he is just a few years ago in his church in central Paris. You still, in fact, I still see the resemblance.
Yeah, even more so.
Yeah. You've aged well together.
Look at this, exactly the same.
Oh, I can't turn anymore. Sorry. I'll look at it later.
Nice.
Next time I'll sit on the other side of the desk. Okay. Thank you.
So the book begins, as did Paul's column, in 1982, January 17th. We follow around about 100 different subjects throughout the life of the column, and it runs from 82 to last summer. And so the first now and then in the book is actually the first column that Paul wrote from 82. This is the 63rd Coastal Artillery coming home in 1919 from the First World War, and we're looking now at 4th and Pike. And today, my job has been to return to these locations and to find something commensurate, at least reflective of the original photograph. So I went back on the 21st of January 2017, and this was the largest march in Seattle history, so it was the Women's March.
So besides the reflection of being the same place, he has the reflection of it being a patriotic, or in this case, a large march. But wasn't that patriotic, though, wasn't it?
I'd say it was ultimately
Oh,
patriotic.
no, it depends upon your flag, yeah, okay. Gotcha. What's that? Very good.
I heard the flu came to Seattle in 1919 when all those people returned from war.
Yes, that's right.
That's how it came. It went
1918
to
is when it
to
started.
Tacoma on Veterans Day.
Yeah. Was it on Veterans Day?
Yeah, because the Veterans Day they came back. Well, I guess that's why it became Veterans Day, because that's the day they all came back. That they date the flu coming in this area from their
They
return.
followed them back from Europe,
Right,
or
exactly.
maybe from Asia, but Europe.
Exactly.
It was everywhere, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got it. Somebody gave me a hardbound album filled with snapshots of the Seattle the Seattle-made hospital that was in France during First World War, filled with Seattle volunteer nurses and doctors. Lots of really tough photographs and, you know, and surgical stuff like that. So there was some of the early flu victims in that album.
Sure.
This is the photo that Paul took in the fall of '81, just before his column began. And so you can see the barista.
That's right. I went out and shot 4 nows one afternoon, and that was one of them. That was the start of the now taking nows or something. Now Jean does it all. Boy, I got it easy.
So you can see at this point, she's holding the original photograph to give us a sense of place.
Yeah.
And here we are looking at it in full. So this is the first page, which dedicated to a column in the book. So then we go, and we're just going to jump around a little bit, not consecutively at this point, but this is a fairly early column from Paul's 1800. This is the deepest Seattle snow. 1880, January 4th, Elisha Ferry, the governor, published the State of the Union address in the Intelligencer on Sunday. And it said, "The Northwest is known for its clement weather, and rarely do we have ice and snow." And the next day, the very next day, the snow began to fall. And it fell for 8 days, and 64 inches came down. This was the deepest snow. The second deepest was in 1916. But this deepest snow, which we're looking at, obviously, days after it occurred, is extraordinary in that it just fell and fell and fell. And what are these? Paul will now talk about the structures here.
The structure on the right was a popular meeting place in Seattle in the early decades. Yesler's Hall at the southeast corner of Front Street, which is what we call First Avenue, and which is Jesus Christ, no, Seattle. And I'm getting old, you know.
This is Cherry.
Cherry Street, yes. That's the first time in my life I've forgotten that. This is what happens when you become an ordinary old man.
You just have to remember the name of your mother, so whenever you think of the
Sherry,
deepest snow,
that's
think
right.
of your mother, and there it is.
It even looks like my mother. Yeah, so and behind that is the sheriff's home at 2nd Avenue, and up the hill 2 more blocks is the Baptist church. Do we have any Baptists here? Hey, buddy. Look who's in the, hey, Ken.
We'll get to you.
You got him in the thing?
Oh, was that the forerunner of the Baptist church that's now at Harvard?
Yeah, First Baptist, yeah. The First Baptist is the forerunner, really, of all the Baptists in town, so it would be the forerunner of this, yeah. Or the early version of it, yeah.
I mean, in terms of congregational.
Huh?
I mean, in terms of like pastoral and congregational continuity as well.
You know, remember I mentioned my age? You lose your hearing too. So what was your, say it again?
He was saying pastoral continuity. It went from
Yeah,
First
that's
Baptist
right.
to First Baptist.
Yeah, there would be pastoral continuity. The congregation would meet and inspect a few candidates and then decide on the person to invite, to take the place of the one who, for the shame of some terrible sin, was asked to leave. So, there you go.
Well, my job is also, always fraught with the danger that I won't be able to repeat something as significant as the old photo. We certainly haven't had in the last couple of years we haven't had a spectacularly deep snow. We had one about 10 years ago that unseated a mayor.
This is heroic. Watch what Jean did to
But-
repeat the snow scene.
I went back one morning I saw the snow falling. It was about 6 a.m. So I ran downtown and I managed to repeat this photo pretty exactly.
They're taking it seriously.
And I want to point out that the top of the fire hydrant has about 4 inches of snow on it.
That's what happens with fire hydrants, isn't it? They, what, has anything to do with dogs or anything?
No, I think it's just they're cold.
Where and where?
This is First and Cherry.
It's the repeat.
Same spot
Same
as the
spot.
previous one, where Paul's mother
Can't maybe remember now.
remembered now. So here we are at First and Cherry.
When?
And this was February 2017. The original was in 1880.
Many, his nows in this book are mostly fairly current, and hence the book is a marvelous exhibit of the contemporary Seattle. Because he would go back and reshoot things over and over often in order to get really what he wanted. And he also got to choose the stories that are in the book. I had to ask him to do that, otherwise I had to do that work. So he went out and shot all of those stories, chose them, and shot some of them many times. And gosh, it's a beautiful book about, you can take out the history from it and just look at the contemporary pictures. And it's a really wonderful display of the city.
There's a lot of history in there too, which is kind of one of the marvelous parts of it, is to be able to flip through it and just learn about your city from the fire to the waterfront. And here we are on the waterfront, being celebrated by the fellow who became the great Norwegian photographer. And his name was Anders Vilse. He was only here for a few years. This is about 1898, looking back down the waterfront, south down the waterfront, and he's standing with his back to Pine Street, looking south. And today, much of this has been lost, but today we'll chart another loss to come.
Now, Gene, when they take down the viaducts, are you going to go back and reprint the book and redo this picture?
Probably for a year from now, when we do another edition, if we do that, I would imagine that would be a good plan.
Publish an addendum.
Almost an addendum.
Could
Yeah,
you-
there might be half a dozen photos that have to be repeated to be accurate, and one of them is this one, because the waterfront is going to change entirely.
Could you do me a little favor?
Yeah.
Could you take Clay with you? This is Clay right here, and pose him in the picture.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Clay's from West Seattle, and like most West Seattle citizens, he's pissed. He didn't want that viaduct to be taken down, because now he's going to miss that easy ride and scenic ride into Seattle, and also have to pay for it, right?
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting. We've done shows all over the city, and you know, when you go to Ballard or West Seattle, you know how these folks are terrified of losing the viaduct, and it's mostly because they'll have to spend a lot of extra time in traffic, and I think that's one of the
Angry citizens, it's just the kind that Trump appealed to.
No, it's not the
Take the bus.
Don't say that.
No, I didn't mean in Seattle, I mean,
Yeah.
it's called populism.
Yeah, I don't know if viaduct is populism. We'll debate
He's
this.
very careful, he wants to sell books, really.
Here we are, another photo south. Anders Vilse is looking, this is about the time of the gold rush, 98, 99, that winter. And in about a 6-month period, more than 100 vessels left from Seattle for the Yukon. And I love this sign up here, which says aluminum houses, portable aluminum houses, only 150 pounds. So if you remember the Gold Rush, the wonderful Chaplin movie with the guys climbing the hill, well, that's pretty literally what the scene looked like at the time as they're going up the mountain. And a number of them were carrying these 150-pound aluminum houses, or as Paul calls them, refrigerators.
I figured we were sticking with this aluminum problem, wasn't it?
I would think so. So Vilse shot this photo of everyone headed north, all of them walking along the waterfront. Here it is today, almost today. Yeah, that's the Marion Street pedestrian overpass, and it's already, in the month since I shot this photo, in the spring of this year, it's already, the parking now has been replaced by a roadway leading up to the fair.
Anybody need a napkin? Okay.
Vilse moved back to Norway, and for the next 30 years or so, he was the national photographer, and in 2015, Norway released a series of stamps. But he really is a marvel, and you can see a lot of his photos of Seattle while he was here, but where he really became sort of the, I mean, you can compare him to an Edward Curtis, because he was taking photos of village life and Laplanders and mountains and scenery. But really a remarkable fellow. Here we are, 1913, looking down from a newly erected but not quite finished building, which was the tallest building west of the Mississippi. You all know it as
Smith Tower.
Smith Tower. Photographer went up about a year before it opened and shot looking north, and you can see, as he saw, revealing Queen Anne and Lake Union and sort of North Capitol Hill, which you hadn't really been able to see from that second and Yesler spot before. Here is St. James in place, and here is the Rainier Club and the Methodist Dome Church.
What's that behind it? Just like empty?
That big empty lot was a torn down hotel, and
Rainier Hotel. It's built right after the fire of '89 to take care of all the people they expected to be coming to town, wanting places to stay, but all the hotels were burned down. So they built that one real quickly, and they had, of course, a lot of people coming to the town to work on rebuilding the city. So that's what that was important for the first few years. But then there was so much more built downtown, closer to the waterfront, to the business life and the entertainment, that the hotel lost its favor within 4 or 5 years. And they moved the hotel down too, and then that is the administration of it. And this big building became home for nurses who were working in the hospitals on the hill. So everything turned out all right, especially for the patients.
well, let's look at today's view from the tower, and I want you to pay attention to the Rainier Club and St. James and Lake Union. So let's watch, see if you can keep your eyes wandering between those three. Oh, and if you're a Seattleite, you might see Queen Anne High School already up on the hill in 1913. So today,
Whoa. Oh
so what remains, there we have our little bit of St. James, and down below the Rainier Club. Now St. James was about, in the old photo, was about 3 years away still from losing its dome, because in the 1916 snow, this also is featured in the book, the dome of St. James collapsed and ended up on the floor of St. James, and it was replaced. But in this photo, it still exists. So it's about 3 years before the dome will be risked and collapse under snow, narrowly missing a bunch of Catholic school kids who were about 45 minutes away from being crushed.
Pretty narrow, 45 minutes.
Wow.
A lot narrower for 3 minutes, wasn't it?
This is the Monongahela, 1931, middle of 1931, leaving this four-master, great sailing ship, mostly sailed the Pacific, was built in Glasgow in 1880, and had spent the preceding 3 or 4 years in Lake Union. And at this point, with the Aurora Bridge about to be completed, they towed this beautiful vessel out, sold it to a Vancouver logging company where it became a barge, and finally was scuttled within the decade.
Come, well, we got plenty of seats here. You can have one for your dog even. You've got seats enough. We're not either too much. What are you holding there? What book is that you're carrying?
Oh, it's a bag.
Oh, back. Okay. It's the same color as the book we're selling. You may want to look at our book and see if you can't slip it in the bag.
So today, we're going to go back to this location, and we will see, this is about where we stand. Now, the only way I could get this shot was with my 21-foot long extension pole, because there are trees that line the avenues all along below the bridge. So, well, now we're going to draw a little line between the Aurora Bridge, or the George Washington Memorial Bridge, and the Gold Rush, because this is called the Taft Key. It's a telegraph key that's in the Smithsonian, and it's made from gold that was discovered by the fellow who discovered first gold in the Yukon, George Carhart. And by 1909, he was a very wealthy guy, and he took some of the nuggets from his first discovery of gold and a slab of Alaskan marble, and he created this telegraph key made of solid gold and gave it to President Taft, who in 1909 used it to open the Alaskan Yukon Pacific Fair Festival. That was our
Expo.
And that was our first Seattle World's Fair.
How many of you know about that fair, the AYP? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I know you weren't there.
Okay. So he gave this to Taft, and Taft pressed it to open the fair. Well, it's been used a number of times since then around the country, but with particular attention to major events in Seattle. One of them was the opening of the George Washington Memorial Bridge on the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birthday, which is February 22nd, 1932. Now, the crowds were waiting on either side of the bridge while the governor at the time was delivering a lengthy speech. And now you have to know that the governor was a fellow who had decried and criticized the building of this bridge and was very opposed to it for the number of years that it took to get through and push along. And so he was delivering a lengthy speech, taking full credit for its construction. And you saw the crowds on either
He was
side.
a Republican from Everett.
And so he was taking full credit, bloviating along, and the crowds were waiting, and he lost track of time. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away, Herbert Hoover was standing with his finger poised over the Taft Key. And at 2:57 that afternoon, Hoover pressed the button, and the flags unfurled, and the fire boats shot off their plumes of water, and the crowd streamed cheering onto the bridge, and the governor never finished his speech. And here we are today. Come across.
You didn't really take that in the same spot, did you, Gene?
It was close to the same spot, but the exact same spot, unfortunately, is covered with trees. So it's impossible to get there. I have my 21-foot pole, though, and that gets me up. Now, you can't really use drones in the city limit either, so.
Now, when you use your 21-foot pole, you yourself were 6'5". When you throw your arms out there, you're up over 7 feet.
I have a confession to make. I can't push the pole into the air because it's too heavy.
Okay.
So I have to seat it. It just goes the 21 feet.
Oh, okay.
But
All right. Well, that's good you confessed to that.
I know. So here is Herbert Hoover at that moment, 2:57 in the afternoon, pressing the button to set off the fireworks on the fireboats. It was used one more time. And this was, I think, the final use of the Taft Key in 1962 to open the Seattle World's Fair.
Gene, do you think Mr. Universe could pick that pole up, pull it over his head with a camera on it?
Oh, I'm sure he could.
Sorry.
So in the book, we feature, this is from a column several years ago, This is young Paula Dahl, and she is the 9 millionth visitor to the Seattle Fair. She received this sign.
Oh.
Her proud parents stand over her, beaming. She got an enormous dog and a very bitter sister. And here she is with her students in elementary school in Issaquah. And she still has this 9 millionth sign on her wall.
But no sister.
But no sister. Yeah. And no dog. She lost the dog. I asked her about the dog.
Oh.
Sibling rivalry. How many of you have had sibling rivalry in your family?
Oh, gosh.
Really? Yeah, really. No, my brothers were all sweet to me. They were older than I was, and they sort of took care of me, so I was lucky, I guess.
Well, typically we pause here, but you want to go on? You want to
Yes.
see some more?
Yes.
Yeah. You're easily amused, you know.
I am.
Well, we had to include some images of Seattle fire. This is one of the rare images taken of the fire itself, a burning. And you can see up on top of Fry Opera House the little figure of the guy standing over the fire, looking right down on top of it. Every building in this picture was burnt. This is taken from First and Spring. And I went back to 30 city blocks were destroyed. And I went back, this is 1889, and I went back last year and took from First and Spring the same scene.
When are we going to get to Fremont? Oh,
First. Here we now look on the 2 days later. This is, what do you think, June 6th? June 8th, 1889?
I'll have to turn around.
It's those hideous ruins.
Oh, yeah. I don't think we really know.
It's a
I
couple
did
days
read
later.
all the newspapers after the fire to try to find ways of timing the photographs. I failed. It's too hard. They took down some of the ruins almost the same day, and then others stayed up for quite a while.
How many have been to Pioneer Square anytime recently in the last year or so? Been down there?
Every one of these people have, you know.
Well, of course, they're Seattleites. Well, let's look at this scene today. And what we'll see, I want you to pay particular attention to this structure, because in today's photo, we're going to see that same location. It's changed quite a bit. And it's right here. And this is, for all of you who know Pioneer Square, of course, the Sinking Ship Garage.
Very good. Who knew that? Raise your hand. You know all of it, don't you?
Because my husband taught me.
You're what?
My husband taught me. He's from Seattle.
Oh, good.
Well, the Sinking Ship.
Hold on to him.
I know, you're right.
The Sinking Ship Garage it's a dark cloud, but it has a silver lining. Let's look at it. If I can change the slide. Okay. This is the hotel that they built to replace the Occidental Hotel, whose corner front piece you saw in the burned photo. This is 1908. And the Seattle Hotel was built on the same footprint and lasted almost until 1960, when it was torn down and replaced by a garage. And the garage today, we'll just hop forward today. We'll look at the loss of this rather beautiful structure. Let's take a look. And so here it is today. There's the sinking ship, the prow of it. And the reason I say there was a substantial silver lining was because by the end of the 60s, there was a movement to get rid of the Pike Place Market, to disappear it, to take it down. And so Victor Steinbrook, who had been an opponent of the removal of the Seattle Hotel, ended up leading a movement of thousands of citizens to stop the removal of the market. And was successful. Hence the name Victor Steinbrook at the north end of the market, the park at the north end. We still celebrate his that, but it was the loss of this hotel that inspired the preservationist movement of the time that saved the market for us. Now Paul is going to talk about the sensitivity of the sinking ship garage.
Oh, well, very good. Little credit is given to the architects of the sinking ship garage, who had their own sensitivities. And at least, in fact, when they heard the complaints of the citizens, explained to them that indeed they too felt sentimental about the old structures, and that with the new garage, they were appointing its fenestration, that is its window plan, with the same kind of Romanesque curves that the building across the street, which is still the what's the name of it? Sorry, Merchants Cafe has. So there you can see the merchant. You really looking at that?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the Merchants Cafe across Esther Way, and then on this side of Esther Way is the celebratory invitation of the basket handle windows. You know where the arch. You know you can see that on the pipes on the top floor of the garage. Can you see that?
Sensitively rendered.
Sensitively rendered, yeah. Well, that was their point. They were actually going to make a garage that appreciated the curves of the Romanesque. Doesn't it?
Do you think that was a sincere gesture, or is it like a cynical?
It was a mix. Definitely a mix.
It was an
Like
accident.
all of rhetoric, practically all of rhetoric, it had a insidious motive that also wanted to believe itself.
So let's just take a look at the market in 1907, just as it's being established, and we can see looking north along the front street that became the market today. So loss that leads to something saved. A Christmas story, right, Paul?
What? Oh, isn't this lovely? You know, we've done 21 shows, right?
22.
Did our wives show up to either of them? Any of them?
They don't care.
Tells you about something, doesn't it?
So here we are at 3rd and Union. This is a building that lasted for 50 years. Built in 1908, torn down in 1958. It had its preservation movement, preservation supporters of its own, but the cleanliness of the city was the issue here. If you were, it was 1915, 1920, and you'd say, meet me at the steps, you would meet someone on these post office steps and know exactly where they were intending you to meet. And the steps were made of chuckanut sandstone, as were the columns and much of the face of the building. It was a lovely structure. And in the late 50s, the powers that be decided that it had been too befouled and stained by pigeon poop and must be torn down, because evidently chuckanut sandstone is porous enough to gather burn. Rather than clean it, they tore it down and replaced it with a structure that many call a filing cabinet on its side. We don't meet each other at the post office today.
We go down to the clock at the market, just 3 blocks away. Yeah, that's right. All right.
Now we're in Fremont, Paul.
Well, this is an exciting comparison. Are you ready for this one? Okay. Ooh.
Well, this is one of the last streetcars in the city. It was up north. All the streetcars downtown have been removed and replaced by gasoline-powered engines and trackless trolleys. And this was one of the last streetcars running. And the motorman who was an operator of streetcars took this photo on the corner of 34th and Fremont Avenue. And so it's of some significance. Within another year, this car was gone, and all of its fellows. But I look at the cowcatcher there. That was a streetcar that headed way north on Finney. where there were
Yeah,
cows.
there are cows up there, yeah. You gotta wonder why would they? I guess they were also people catchers, right?
Yeah, well,
What's that?
Fremont Baptist Church.
And there's Fremont Baptist Church up there.
Gene and I
Keen eyes.
did a story on those Baptists and their orchestra.
So they do have an orchestra. Now it's time we're going to push forward, and I had to find something to replace the trolley. And I went back exact same spot. I had widened it a little bit, and here's what we found.
whoa.
So, of course, we call this one Two Women Walking Abreast. With the trolley.
That's part of it. How many of you go to the fair, Fremont Fair? You're going like this, like.
Well, some years, yes, some years.
I'm with you. Yeah.
It's pretty, it's a mess down there. Oh, we're all together now. Oh. And the name?
Kalakala.
And here is the Kalakala going through the locks in 1948, about 13 years after it was set out onto the Sound to traverse with its single-stroke engine. Because it really was a terrible, terrible engine. It was like a lawnmower about the size of a building, but it wasn't. It was an engine to be conjured with, but you couldn't hear anything. So here we have Clay Eels, who's going to demonstrate the sound of this single-stroke engine. How many of you rode on the Kalakala? How many Kalakala riders?
Oh, more than one?
There's a couple.
My husband, he's not here.
Okay.
Wait a second, we have an interruption here.
Excuse me.
Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to mention, if you all know David Williams. He's a cousin.
Yes,
Came out with
yes.
Waterway.
But no one can do
202.
a sonic impression.
But these pictures are great.
Oh, thank you. No one can do a sonic impression of the Kalakala because it does not exist.
I
Except
didn't get
in
anything he said. Did you hear it?
I did.
He's making us aware of author David Williams, who wrote Too High and Too Steep,
Oh, yeah.
and used similar photos.
We featured David in our column.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we know
No,
about
I don't mean to.
You're putting us down.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you are too, you know. Here
No.
we're celebrating a new
I'm
book and you
sorry
bring up a
to-
rival author.
No, I'm as sorry as you. I
Well, so were we.
respect you, sir. Yeah. I'm also
Oh, yeah, I love it. We like David.
But I respect you.
But,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, get along now.
All right, so now Clay is going to do his impression of the Kalakala.
I'll be back.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, Clay.
Well, the reason that there are not that so many people who have ridden the Kalakala is that its last run was in the summer of 1967. And I was fortunate to ride it in that last month when my high school stage band was going to Bremerton for the Olympic College Stage Band Festival, and it was about to be mothballed. And if you walked onto it and then you heard the engine start to roar, the sound was unmistakable. It went, whoa, and you felt that the walls were going to tumble on down on top of you.
Thank you,
We're all
Clay.
going to try to repeat that. All right, here we go. Got your arms out. And what is it again, Clay? On three. 1, 2, 3. You like it as a chorus?
That's better than Moon River.
Nice introduction.
Kalakala is being towed back from Lake Union through the locks back out to the Sound. And you can see the upper decks here filled with folks. So it's a celebration going on. And the windows are filled with faces. And at the very top, pay attention to the wheelhouse, which will reappear in a slide or two. So I went back to the locks in early 2017 looking for something that would repeat this and found the USS Turner Joy, which was had been repaired and restored, repainted in Lake Union for a couple months, and then returned to its berth in Bremerton, where it's a museum ship. And only after taking the photo did I discover that the Turner Joy was
Ironically named.
ironically named, yeah, perhaps. It was one of two ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, two destroyers. The first one was the USS Maddox, and the Turner Joy steamed to its aid when it was attacked by perhaps fictitious Vietnamese torpedo boats. But it did manage to get us embroiled in the Vietnam War. So it was decommissioned in the early 80s, and now can be toured in Bremerton.
Thank you for coming with your dog.
Well, thank you for having us. It was a pleasant surprise to have it find you.
He's probably hungry now. He'll want some kids.
Here's the Turner Joy off the coast of Vietnam.
Oh.
Now, Clay Eels, who's a West Seattleite, returned to the waterfront and just outside of Salty's, the restaurant in West Seattle. You can find what remains of the wheelhouse of the Kalakala. And for the most part, it's gone. It's been salvaged and recycled, but they kept the wheelhouse. And here we are looking at the wheelhouse from the outside, and now Clay went back and shot the skyline from the wheelhouse. Now, what was the problem with the wheelhouse of the Kalakala, Paul?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, it was designed in such a way with curves and Art Deco ornaments that it was hard to see the deck from the wheelhouse, and hence they had to put another person on the flying wing part and signal to the captain, or the captain, right? And in order to get a signal from the wheelhouse to the deck, you had to transfer it through another person. You know, that was the problem with it. And it was that ran the Kalakala had other complaints.
Yeah. Well, it was not. It was a lovely ship, and every one of these shows in which we come to the Kalakala is greeted at that moment with the same, oh.
It is interesting how predictable everything is. Yeah.
Well, we all share a sentiment and emotion. If I saw it for the first time, I'd say, oh.
Yeah.
Here we are now. We're jumping to the oldest house, the oldest structure still standing in Seattle
Anybody
today.
know where that is?
West Seattle.
Did you cheat?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I read it in your call. That's cheating.
Where? Elkie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a house that was built to replace a house that had burned down in the early 60s. It was built by Doc Maynard when he moved to West Seattle and traded his property in downtown Seattle for 320 acres in West Seattle and started a farm there.
Point at Elkie.
On the point at Elkie. And he started a farm there with his wife, Catherine Maynard, and the farm was not very successful. But they lived there for several years and finally sold the house to the Hanson family. And the Hanson family is standing on the porch here in the 1890s. And they are significant in Seattle history for a couple of reasons, but one of them gave Paul the use of this photo.
Oh, yes. Well, they are the grandparents and the mother. The mother's in white of what's his name? Hagelin. Yeah, Ivor Hagelin. I'm writing a book about him, and I can't remember his name. So we're in trouble. Yeah.
So there's
Ivor
Ivor's
Hagelin.
one.
Ivor Hagelin. Did any of you ever know Ivor? Any of you?
You went to West Seattle, huh?
Yes. Yes, that's right. It is. Yeah.
When did he go to West Seattle High?
Well, I used to know the answer to that question. Let's see, he was in the first class, so we can ask Clay about this. When did it open at West Seattle High?
The West Seattle High School building opened in 1917. There was a West Seattle High School in the Castle building that went back to the 1890s. But you're referring to 1917,
Yeah,
I
he
believe.
was born, Ivor, in 1905. Oh, boy, what are we trying to solve here?
Well, we're going forward here, looking at this ancient house. Here are Ivor's extended family, his cousins. This is his grandmother, his grandfather. This is Snidely Whiplash.
Snidely Whiplash.
Doesn't that look like Snidely Whiplash there? The rent collector, the fellow who's going to...
Wait a second, our interrupter's back. What do you got to share with us this time?
Let's keep going.
Anything?
Oh, let's keep going, let's keep going.
All
right.
I'll tell you later, after your
And this is young Tom Sawyer. And he's peeing on the side of the house. Today, we go back, and here's Clay again, with the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. This is the house as it stands today. And it is unmarked. There are no plaques. There's nothing to tell us that it existed, except at the very end of the street, there's a little plaque that says, the wrong end of the street. It says, a house once stood here. That was Doc Maynard's.
It looks smaller.
It is smaller. This wing
The wing on the side they took.
This wing was removed. Some of the Hanson family in a recent show actually said, well, the wing was added on to accommodate our burgeoning family. So it may be, we don't know this for sure, but it may well be that this house, without that extra little elongated roof line, it may be that this is closer to the original that Maynard designed. Well, we don't know for sure. Paul's going to go down in his basement and figure this out this week. Now we come towards the last couple of slides in the show. This is Kiki Solu, or Princess Angeline, so named by Catherine Maynard, the second wife of Doc Maynard. And here she is in her shack down below Western Avenue, between what is now Pike Place Market and the waterfront. And Paul and Ron Edge, our collaborator, went over all of these structures with a fine-tooth comb, and for the first time, last November, found the actual location of this shack using stumps and roof lines and found the exact spot. And I went back with Ron, and we discovered that it was in a little patch, a little green space between, on the left, the Pike Place Market parking garage, and on the right, the Fixed Door building. Another half block or so down is the Pike Place Hill Climb. But this is the only real green stretch, and so it gave us a little pleasure to know that spot was still open to the air. I mean, I was concerned that we'd be shooting cars, or a boiler in a basement.
This is closed off and you cannot go to it. They had to go inside by way of a neighbor there. But you can see this from the air by going to Pike Place Market and into Lowell's Restaurant and go to the second floor and look out the window, and it is straight down below you. This little green patch.
Originally, you wanted to be buried next to Henry, or be buried next to Henry.
We have, that's right, it's still there.
Here she is again.
Neither of them moved.
Here she is again, sitting a little higher up the hill. She's the market doesn't exist yet. This is around 1890, and we inset a picture of her father, Chief Seattle. And so Kiki Solu is sitting with her back to First Avenue and in what is now Post Alley. And the reason we have both of them together here like this is because we had two sitters come and take their place, both direct descendants of Chief Seattle. And here they are. On the left is, on the right is actually standing and coming down towards us is the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle through his second wife, Ken Workman. And he came down with his distant cousin, Mary Lou Slaughter.
Is the great-great-great-grandson, Chief
Seattle.
Seattle, right here. So come and shake hands with your grandson. You should go back and forth up these rows and shake their hands. That's what you should do. They can brag about having shook the hand of the grandson, great grandson.
Next to him is
A
Mary
nice
Lou.
guy too, a nice guy, very talented.
Next to him is Mary Lou Slaughter, who designed, created these wonderful cedar robes and a vest that Ken's wearing. It's like a fashion show, Ken.
He looks like he's from Central Casting, look at him. A handsome dude, you know.
Turning red.
Anyway, so they very generously came down and posed for us for
Go shake hands
for a
with
while.
some of these people.
Stop.
Why
Well,
not?
he'll do it as soon as we're done. He's got to say something here. Just hold
Oh, I'm
on.
sorry, yeah.
So I'm going to have Ken tell you the reason why we finished the show with this last slide here, which is a picture that Clay Eels took of me taking their photo. And here we are. Ken?
Oh, so when Jean called up and he expressed this desire to take a photo right here, and I said, well, you don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to Mary Lou. And the response was, no, we want the both of you. And so Mary Lou and I were down here, and it was a very crowded marketplace, just like you saw in previous pictures. And cars were coming and going, and people were coming and going. And so Jean's figuring out his camera, and I'm thinking to myself, take the picture, people are wanting to get by. And so finally the picture is taken, and I turn, well, I'm looking at Jean. I turn around and I look behind me because somebody had bumped me in the elbow. You know, that kind of bump where, get out of the way, we're trying to get through. And there wasn't anybody there.
Oh.
Just like you see way back there was nobody there. And so I asked Jean, was there somebody there? Clay was there too. And the answer was no, there wasn't anybody there. So I just went, okay, I understand. So we got the picture, and I got a bump on my elbow. It was 2 fingers. And so Paul asked the other day, he said, well, show me what that's like. It wasn't a little tap or anything, it was a push. So that's what happened on that day.
That's incredible.
Thank you,
Jean has another explanation.
When was that taken? When?
This was taken this year in the spring. So probably May, I think we got together in May.
Oh,
this
yeah,
year.
May.
So fairly recently. Anyway, thank you, Ken, for taking this picture. It made Ken came down today. I encouraged him to come because I said, you know, we're going to be signing this book, and Ken's been to maybe 2 or 3 of our shows, and I thought for our last show, it would be really fun if you pick up a copy. I think Ken will sign his photo, which would be pretty special. I'm a huckster.
Oh, wow, that's a good idea.
And here we are with that photo I threatened you with Paul in 2011 at Gasworks. He still has his clothes on. And it was taken by our French friend, Berger. Looking good to see. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So how long were you there?
Across the street.
So on my birthday, you there when everything 3 houses up and so.
But I mean, when the feds came
There's a story to it. Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, yes.
See?
With a C, E-R-I-C-A.
A friend of mine. No, I find it. No, I will. It's easier to say it.
Okay,
Let's see.
He's a lover of history too.
Okay, I'll say
It's
that.
become your grandfather's town.
You know, it's only 170 years old or so.
Yeah,
It's radical change.
yeah.
And this book right here is a continuation
Okay.
into modern society.
There you go.
So for my people, we were here when there were trees.
All right,
That's for Eric.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Paul at dorpat.com.
73.
Paul at Dorpat, D-O-R-P-A-T, Paul at Dorpat.
Oh, yeah, and you should get
There we
Ken
go.
to sign his page.
I'll put you on the list
That's a
of people
classic.
interested in what we do with that stuff,
Be a
and then
little
I'll
bit
let you know.
proud
I can't promise people have
and not completely appalled.
Can I make it out?
It's easier now than it was in the past. It's very good.
Oh, yeah.
98, 1898.
Yeah.
So it's like easier to know enough of it and remember the
Since 1877?
1977. So but the change has been so rapid, it's probably been more pronounced than what the word is for
Clay.
There's a math word there.
He's my old president. From the South Seattle Historical Society.
Okay.
So that's
Oh, really?
Fourth. 90s.
Well, that fits in here.
Yeah, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get him, sign it too, for sure.
He sold you a lot of
It upside down.
couple, guess a couple pieces of ephemera on Seattle's history.
170.
Sold me
Okay,
something?
that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I hardly ever buy anything.
Must have been good.
So photographs are and maps. And he didn't know me at the time, so when he found out my interest in freeways, he suggested maybe contact
Oh, I
you.
see.
What this look
I
like?
faintly remember getting a lot of stuff on the freeways from somebody, but how would I ever find it?
Well, you know, it's a
I may very well have given it to an
And you have
archivist,
some good artists out there.
and I am.
Good to see.
Self.
Wow.
Yeah. and
That's
60s are
amazing.
frozen. Where's my husband?
Oh, wow, look at that.
Claridge.
I still like
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you came to.
Absolutely.
it's a 100-year book.
I'm so glad you didn't sign it the first time.
That's great. Are you on this list?
That's fine, yes.
That's
You
wonderful.
want it on the page?
Yeah, right. I think it's 175. Thank you very much. I'm very happy.
So you know, well, my birth certificate is right across the street from Salty's.
Really?
Third house up.
Oh my goodness.
So when you talk about the clock, I'm like, I keep wanting to scratch and sniff the page. It's really sad.
We're gonna get
Oh, I know. How about Lisa, lover of gray skies and silver linings?
Sure.
Okay.
Love it.
absolutely. You don't have to be that creative.
The cheek, would you?
It always makes me happy when Ken is around. It feels like there's substance at our side.
I didn't observe that.
Well, there's that.
Asking us to leave when they do that, I think.
You sent it to
My cousin David.
I don't know.
How's
Why would
Now you're
anybody,
gonna have to think of something.
why would
for her.
anybody
I'll
startle
have to
you
yes.
Her
saying
son Brian
in
from
a
now
barn
on
outfit?
B-R-Y.
B-R-Y-A-N.
how's Guido?
We figured when he eventually moves out, he'll have one for his house too.
Right, exactly. Okay. So this is to Brian, B-R-Y-A-N.
B-R-Y-A.
Bring it back, make a sketch something, I'll make a
He's my
snowman.
daughter's grandfather.
Aw.
You know, so
This is cute.
like
Yeah,
when
but
the-
that doesn't compare to what
For
these
when
guys
the sun
Oh, I know, that's
peeks
true. It doesn't
through
compare
our
to, yes.
clouds.
Thank you.
With love
Cloudy
eternal.
days.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
You know what?
He's
They're
a
only,
poet.
they're only getting brighter.
He's a poet.
As of yesterday.
Yeah, I know. I always do that too, Ken. I always think
Bring it over
it's
here,
now we have hope returning to the world.
Absolutely.
Because we're slowly moving forward into light again.
Who is this to?
So we got our book, but we got one for our neighbor Lisa and her son Ryan. So we want to make sure they have them for.
Have we already got
This one's
some,
for us. It's for Jamie and Jim.
That's it.
Okay.
You weren't here when we had them sign our picture. We had a.
Oh my God. Wow.
Hallmark. Oh, nice. Yeah. We went on a history walk with Jim like 12 years ago. And that's us with him in front of the plaque.
You were all kids at that point.
Yes, look, we were all kids, all children.
Yeah, and I think he's wearing the same jacket that he wore in the picture with his brothers.
Let's see.
Except the Mama Little sweatshirt. It's that same, you were in the same jacket.
Actually, I have about 5 of them, because they all wore out.
It was a very old house. So I'll open it up to that page for you then. What
I
page
know
is
the
it?
house you're talking about. It was on the southeast corner of Republican.
Well, that's Republican.
Yeah, Republican and Queen Anne Avenue. And it was the home that David and Louisa Denny built when they had some money. And then they lost it all and they had to give it up. And then it became a rooming house.
These are pretty good pens. They're from the university.
Yeah, I love those.
Yeah, you want a picture of this?
Okay.
They're great
They're
pens.
supposed to dry.
You use the email?
And they're archival.
Would you take my email address?
Yes, so. big
Indicate
letter.
that's what you want, I'll send you a picture.